both sides of the globe, let's say. So we did do one this morning, and we are doing one this afternoon for our kind of colleagues in Europe and in the Americas. So let me go forward with a quick set of slides. I just want to say that with ZP, if somebody's getting the FoodSense, then one of the things we do obviously is when the box arrives, I think a box is not quite the right term for it, but when the technology arrives, we do give personal online training. And I think today we'll give you a good sense of actually what that training means, because obviously in this modern world, it's very easy to show and tell and have real-time feedback. So everyone gets personal training when it arrives. And we also have these weekly webinars. So we've had a very interesting question this week. And in fact, that will tomorrow, we'll answer that question during the weekly webinar. So I think the sort of technical support from Zimmer and Peacock we do this webinar once a month, but we do it twice in the day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon to cover everyone in different time zones. Then we do have a weekly questions and answers, and there is one tomorrow. We do it 8 a.m. London time. It's always recorded and you can sort of catch it online. But then there's also personalized training for people when they've got the kit, so that we can sort of talk through exactly what's going on. It's a bit much of us to talk about ourselves, but I do want to just very quickly introduce the company. So DP, we were launched in 2014. My name is Martin Peacock. I'm one of the founders, and I have Niti, who is the product manager for FoodSense Online today. And I also have Solron, who's one of the lead scientists on the FoodSense technology. We are ISO 13485. This makes us extremely qualified for making electrochemical biosensors. So we do a lot of work in the medical and diagnostics industry. So in some ways, I dare say it, we're slightly overqualified for some of what we're going to talk about today. But it's good to be sort of overqualified, because it means we can do a good job on this FoodSense technology. I'll talk about the facilities on the next couple of slides. Just to say, this is the team. You can we did a count during one of our company meetings, and I think there's something like 23 languages are spoken at ZP, so it's quite an international team. And in fact, Solron is here, and Niti is here, and myself is here. So you'll see at least Solron and I today. So we do have multiple sites. I think our facilities are really state of the art. We have a larger facility. Large is relative. We have a 4,000 square meter facility, which is manufacturing, and we have a 1,000 square meter facility, which is R&D, and those two are in Norway. Then we have a smaller facility in Coventry, which is in the UK, and we also have a satellite office in a city called Swansea in the UK as well. So we have approximately 4 sites. Three of them are fairly sized, and one of them is just a satellite office. But what we're going to do now is focus on FoodSense. I'll give a quick kind of history on this. So the quick history is, this is Professor Richard Compton at Oxford University. He did a publication, it feels like it might be 15 years ago now. And at the time, because it was kind of Oxford and he was talking about chili sensing, people like the BBC picked it up, and some of the sort of news outlets in the US picked it up because it sounded sort of like fun, basically, to measure the hotness of chilies. Now, what Richard talked about in that original paper was capsaicin. So anyone who works with chilies or is sort of familiar with chilies knows that the molecule that's primarily driving the hotness of chilies is capsaicin. And Richard, who is actually an electrochemist. So I happen to be an electrochemist. The company is sort of founded around electrochemistry. So he used a technique called cyclovoltammetry. Now, Solron today will be doing a live demonstration, and in that live demonstration, you'll see a progress bar running on an app. What we're not showing you is it's actually doing cyclovoltammetry. So this cyclovoltammetry is, let's say, very distinctive. We get these peaks, and they appear in a sort of certain order. So the fact that these peaks are there and the order which they appear tells us this is capsaicin. And then Solron will mention this, but the kind of area under the curve tells us how much capsaicin is there. And from that, we can calculate the Scoville heat units, the SHUs. So there's the first peak, so that's the software sees that, thinks that's fairly indicative of capsaicin. Then it sees the next peak. Okay, that's further evidence that is capsaicin. As I say, this technical cyclophotometry. And then we get a third peak, and that's really distinctive that this is actually capsaicin. So this is kind of the fingerprint for capsaicin. And whether these peaks are small or big tells us how much capsaicin is actually in there. So this means really that we're an objective measurement for hotness of chilies. So you can objectively measure chilies using HPLC, high pressure liquid chromatography. This is a technique where anyone who's in this kind of chili industry knows about this. You don't always own this instrument because it's too expensive to own. It's very hard to maintain. You do need to interpret the results, and you kind of need, graduate chemists, at least, if not masters of the chemistry, to kind of run this kind of instrument. So the running costs are never worth people actually owning this equipment, but it does give an objective measurement for the capsaicin. The Scoville test, which is really a sort of organoleptic test where everyone tastes it and scores it, that doesn't really happen because actually it takes a lot of manpower to have a dozen people in a room testing it. So it doesn't really happen. What really does happen is people are just guessing or using educated guesses using experience of what the hotness is. And then obviously you have FoodSense. And FoodSense is, whereas HPLC is using high pressure liquid chromatography and it's using really absorption spectroscopy, we happen to be using electrochemistry to measure the technique. But I would say that panel testing and the quality manager testing and sort of writing their notes, that's subjective testing, whereas HPLC and FoodSense are really objective tests. The big difference between FoodSense and HPLC is simply the cost and also the ease of running this instrument as well. So we are an objective test. You will notice that I said about 5 minutes ago that we are ISO 13485. So the ISO 13485 standard says that we're qualified for the development and manufacture of electrochemical biosensors. So the most well-known biosensor in the world is the glucose strip, where a diabetic will test their blood and get a blood glucose reading from that, and then they can control their sugar intake and try and control their diabetes. Well, when you look at that, when you look at a glucose meter and you look at the FoodSense, you will really see actually this is the same similar technology. So we have a meter, we have strips, and because we're essentially more modern than, let's say, glucose meters, we also have an app as well. So the app gives us the interface with which we can control FoodSense, and also where the data goes when the FoodSense meter has run. But the similarity between glucose testing and FoodSense is not by accident. It's because we started off doing medical diagnostics, and when because we knew Richard and we knew about the technology, then we licensed it from Oxford, and here we are today, let's say. Now, when we did start developing this, we do actually own HPLC, so we were able to take standard products, which were chilies, either the peppers, chili sauces, chili pastes, chili powders, and test them on the HPLC that we own. And we were also able to test it on the FoodSense. So this is just really making sure that we correlate with HPLC. I'll comment on this in a bit, but people think that HPLC is really this, like, it must be I hate the term gold standard because it's not the gold standard. In fact, it's quite variable, but it's the only standard that industry has at the moment. So we did compare ourselves against HPLC and make sure that we're correlated with it. But also, unbeknownst to us, we sold a unit to the University of Minnesota. There was a guy there called Charlie Rower. You'll see a link in a minute, and that link is to his scientific papers. But Charlie actually independently bought a FoodSense, nothing to do with us. He just bought it, and then he tested it against HPLC as well. And his work is independent of us, and that's important because, obviously we're super biased. We think we've got a great technology, but when other people actually say, no, this is good, then, that's kind of nice. And he's, academic. He wants to sort of just make sure that things work, let's say. So he tested it, and he also gives us a glowing review as well. Now, what's important about his paper as well is that he would take a sample, he would test it on the FoodSense, and he would test it on the HPLC. But for every HPLC measurement, he only tested once because it cost him about $100 to get the test done. Whereas with the FoodSense, he tested it in triplicate because it didn't cost him $100. It cost him, a few dollars, per test. So he was able to do triplicate testing on the FoodSense, whereas he only did a singlet testing on the HPLC. And he came back with a correlation and said, no, this is good. And we promote the paper because, he did us a favor, if I can put it that way. It's just interesting that people really think that HPLC is an amazing, I don't think they think it's amazing, but they have to believe something, and so they will believe their results. So they'll send a sample to an HPLC lab, they'll get a certificate of analysis. What's interesting about these certificates of analysis is you get a Scoville heat unit. You'll get a score. It will say 15,000 Scoville heat units. There's no error, or very often there's no error on that. So it's almost like they're reporting that it's absolutely 15,000 Scoville heat units, but actually there's always an error, but they never report it. So if you send the same sample to the lab, and then you send the same sample another time to the same lab, and you send the same sample to the same lab another time, you will get 3 results. So I just want to say this because one of the first things that happens when people get this is, oh, I've got this certificate of analysis from my HPLC lab. This is the truth. And it's not the truth. We do have a particular client, they're very large, there's sort of easily tens of billions of dollars worth of turnover. So they can afford to actually send off to different send off to the HPLC labs, get results back, and they will tell you, no, there's a big error coming from the lab. So be careful if you use a lab, they're trying to do the best job they possibly can, but they won't report the error, very rarely report the error in their certificate of analysis. And so, people believe it, but actually there's an error associated with it. So there's also the same that if you send it to different labs, you will get different results as well. I mean, that's, even more common, let's say. So 3 labs, same sample, 3 different results. And they can be quite dramatically different as well. So we do have to highlight that because the first thing that happens is people will they'll have some expectation from their HPLC system and will be well correlated with them, but don't always think the HPLC system is as golden as unfortunately you think it is. We've been on the market for easily 5 years at this point, so we're definitely on generation 3 at this point. So this is not like a product we launched yesterday. This is a product that we launched whilst I didn't have grey hair. So it's been around a few years now. One of the things that you will notice, this is an important point, that when Solron does her testing today, she will use different volumes of the buffer. And it comes down to the fact that when I was talking about Richard Compton and the University of Oxford, I mentioned obviously the molecule capsaicin. Capsaicin is a very organic molecule. It does not like to be dissolved in water. It likes to be dissolved in organic solvents. It quite likes ethanol. That's quite an organic solvent. It likes fats and oils. Now, the reason that's important is because what you'll see is that Solron will take a sample of the chili sauce and she'll put it in our buffer. And if it's mild, then we may only use a very small amount of buffer. But if we think it's hot, like a chili powder, we'll increase the amount of buffer. And this is because intrinsically capsaicin does not like to be dissolved in aqueous solutions or water-based solutions. The only reason that you manage to get it dissolving in let's say products is because actually there's some fats and oils in there that help to solubilize it. Otherwise it's not terribly soluble. So what you'll see is that if it's mild, we'll only use a small amount of buffer because we won't saturate the solution. But if we think it's hot, then actually we will use a larger amount of buffer, because what will happen is if we don't use a large amount of buffer, we'll get repeatable results, but you'll say, no, it's hotter than that. It's hotter than 15,000 Scoville heat units. And what's happened is we've saturated the solution. So that's the little bit of optimization that we sometimes do with customers just to get the right kind of volume. But you will see a demonstration of that today as well. So we're going to do a couple of demos now. One of them will be on Tabasco, and then it'll be a surprise to me as well as to what the second one is. But we tend to do Tabasco not because we think it's clever, it's just that people can independently confirm online, what the Tabasco score should be. Whereas with other products, it's not so easy to independently confirm what the result actually should be. So I'm turning my camera off. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll let Soren kick in. Hi, Soren.
Hey, yeah. So my name is Soren, and I will, as Martin said, run a quick demonstration on a couple of chili products. So here is the FoodSense box, which you can see fits inside the palm of my hand. And the first thing I'll do is to insert one of our FoodSense, one of our chili sensors into the FoodSense box, just to make it ready. So I'm making sure not to touch the electrodes of the sensor when inserting it, not to scratch the surface of the electrodes and damage them. And then I will start preparing the sample. So here we have, as in Tabasco, I'm just mixing it, shaking it, just so to make sure that I have a homogeneous solution. And I'll just pour some into this weighing sheet, just so that it's easier for me to pipette it. And then I will use a vial, and I will add 1 milliliter of the chili pop buffer. So 1 milliliter, like this. And the next thing I'll do is I'll add 100 microliter of the Tabasco sauce. So that means I'm mixing and adding Tabasco into the buffer in a 1:10 ratio. Because as Martin said, we vary the degree or the extent of buffer according to how hot the sauce is, and Tabasco isn't as hot, so that's why a 1:10 mixture ratio is good for us. So I'll pipette 100 microliters into the buffer like that. I'll show you. Okay, so the close-up shows you that the Tabasco is falling down to the bottom of the vial. So the next thing I'll do is I will use a vortex just to mix the two solutions real well. And it also allows for the capsaicin to be extracted from the Tabasco phase into the buffer phase. And like that, Tabasco is very homogeneous in itself, so it doesn't require that much time to allow for it to mix well. So now you can see that it's it's fairly well mixed. So the next step I will do now is to pipette it onto the sensors. I will pipette a volume of 50 microliters. 50 microliters is a volume that will cover all the electrodes of the sensor. So when you do this, make sure that all the electrodes are covered. That. Cover it. Then I will hit, okay, so I've opened the FoodSense app, which looks like this, and you see that I have a 1:10 mixture ratio, which is correct for and my screen froze, but no worries. Okay, so what you can see the progress bar here, and it will take approximately a little less than a minute for it to finish. But in the meantime, I just want to show you like the sensor with the solution covering the electrodes like that, and you can see that there's like this bubble of the solution that is covering the electrodes. Then I'll put it carefully back down so that it doesn't go off of the sensor. So here you see the progress bar is very soon wrapping up. And it comes back as 3,145 Scoville heat units, which makes sense for a sauce like Tabasco, which is in the range of where Tabasco themselves are claiming that their where their sauce is at. So these sensors are one-time use sensors. So now I will wipe off the solution, and I will dispose of the sensor. As the capsaicin, the molecule is very has a likeness to the surface of the electrode. So if we would over with the same solution onto it and run it over and over, it will come back as hotter and hotter, just because you get more and more capsaicin onto the surface, and you convert it into the other components that we do measure. So so the next thing I'll do is I will prepare a more hot sauce. So this sauce is a pure Naga sauce, so it's a lot hotter. We expect it to be a lot hotter than the Tabasco sauce. And it's also a bit more chunky, so it will be fairly different from the Tabasco sauce. So again, I will just mix it well. And then I will pour some into the weighing chip. And if you want to see how chunky it is, you can see that it it stays in this one place, while as for Tabasco will just go around. So since we expect this this sauce to be hotter, we do want to make a mixture ratio of 1:100 rather than 1:10, just so that we don't reach the saturation point that Martin was talking about. So in order for us to do that, we will add 5 milliliters of the buffer and 50 microliters of the sauce. So buffer, we will add 5 milliliter, which is 5,000 microliters. Okay, put it into the vial like that. And then I will add 50 microliters of this chunky sauce. All right, so 50 microliters, I'm adding it into the solution. That. And then close up will show you that again it falls down to the bottom, and I will use the vortex to mix it. That, and then I will just give it a bit more time, because the sample preparation is a very crucial step for your measurements. This sample is a bit more chunky than the others, than the Tabasco, so it needs more time for us to extract the capsaicin from the sauce phase into the buffer. And also, if you have a very chunky sample or powders, a lot of times I would actually let it rest on the bench or stir overnight or mix overnight, or just for a few hours, and then test it after that. But you have to be consistent on how much time you allow for it to mix. But usually what I see is if I test something after 5 hours or test something overnight, a lot of times it gives me the same results, and that means that I was able to get the capsaicin into the water water or the buffer phase after just 5 hours. Okay, so now I'll show you. So here you see that it's mixed, but you also see some chunks and bits in there, and that's totally fine. What we will do is we will just pipette, and if some chunks and bits are getting onto the sensor, that's fine. 50 microliters. Like that. And then, okay, sorry about this, but I'll have to show you in a close-up. But as you can see, here is a mixture ratio of 1 to 10. I will change that into 1 to 100 because now I'm using a 1 to 100 mixture ratio. So you can see it now, and then I will click measure. And again, the progress bar will run. And as Martin was saying, for the cyclic voltammograms, it's now you see the progress bar, but what's actually doing is running through that cyclic voltammetry or cyclic voltammogram, and it's assessing the different peaks, and it's seeing what the peak height is like and what the area below the peak is like, and they are correlating that to how much capsaicin you have in your sample. So as for Tabasco, we expect a much lower peak than what we do for this Naga sauce, which is expected to be more pungent. But now the results are coming back, and you can see that it's coming back as 30,432 Scoville heat units, which is quite a lot more spicy than that was for Tabasco. And so this was the quick demonstration on how to measure two different sauces, which have quite different looks, different feels, and different spiciness. All right.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Soren. I appreciate it's quite late for you there, so thank you for staying and doing those demos. And so I suppose what we're going to do is we just want to say that if people have any questions, reach out to us on the FoodSense website, but also to say that if you're still wanting to kind of see this a few more times, then every month we do a live streaming webinar and demo, and the next one will be on the 22nd of August. But if you have any questions, just reach out to us, through the website, and we'll answer them. As I say, we do a weekly Q&A anyway on FoodSense, so there'll rarely be more than a week's delay in actually asking a question and getting a video response. So thank you, Soren, thank you, Niti, and thank you for attending today. And as I say, any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, thanks very much.